Start that. So, official welcome. Good morning, everybody. Fantastic morning once again here in Johannesburg. Ian says it's a fantastic morning in the UK as well, which is great. So, fantastic mornings around the world. So, and I'm looking forward to a fantastic morning chatting with all of you. So, big welcome, and yeah, let's pop across to Lee for a quick introduction, and then I think we'll be hearing from Mpho. So, Lee, over to you for a moment.
Welcome and hello. It's great to see you all. Middle of the week. It's Mother's Day on Sunday, is it? So we, yeah, all getting ready for that. I remind everybody that so that I can get something as well. I am very grateful when people are willing to share something of themselves, and grateful because I know it's a moment of vulnerability to share your own story, but especially because in that sharing, in that revealing something of yourself and your life, you get to impart something to all of us, that we get to take away something that is meaningful and triggers something that could create new ways of thinking and doing in our own lives. And so it just becomes a virtuous cycle of good things being passed on. So Mpho, thank you so much for taking the mic today. And so I'm going to hand over to you and allow you to go ahead as you'd like.
Here we go. Yeah, morning everyone. I'm excited to share my story. When I was asked to do this, I realized that I'd actually never really thought about what my story actually is. I realized, as a speaker, I've told my story in bits and pieces, but not as one whole thing. And my story is very influenced by my grandmother. So I come from a very, very big family. My grandmother had 7 children. She's the biggest personality I've ever known in my life. She was incredibly, I always use the word powerful because that's how I remember her. You know, nothing stopped her. She was always going. She was always creating. She was always building something. My grandfather died when I was 10. And what I remember of him is that he was incredibly strict. He was a pastor and he was very frugal. And my grandmother was the opposite. She was a spender. She was very flamboyant. She loved clothes. She loved bags. She loved shoes. She loved to travel. Very, very big personality. My parents were 19, both of them, when they had me. And my grandmother took me and raised me as her 8th child. So we had this big family, the 7 kids, cousins, everyone. We had this massive house. It was a corner house, and my grandmother would just take people, from the streets. One day you'll come and there's somebody in your room sleeping on the floor. It's like, who's this? No, this child was abandoned. So my home was that kind of a home. I've put in this image of me and my brothers and my cousins on the table here when we were young. But this was a typical day in the Mnguni family, where we had big breakfasts, and it was big breakfast with everything: bacon, eggs, omelets. My aunts and I used to compete about who was the best at making the best foods. Big lunches, big Sunday lunches. Big birthdays. I can't even describe the personality of that home. Everything was big. Everything was lots of people. We really didn't need anybody else for a party. The other picture, that's me and my father. I must have been 12 or 13 there. I can't really remember, or probably younger. So my relationship with my dad was really a strange one because we were raised as brother and sister. And my dad was also an incredibly big personality, but it's because my grandmother spoiled him a lot. You know, I think at around 21, my grandmother had already bought him a Porsche. He was supposed to study medicine, but he didn't, and he had many girlfriends, and he was really loved by many girlfriends, and he ended up having 8 children with 4 different women. And those 8 children are incredibly close today because that's one of the things that he took from his mother. He made sure that all of us, the 8 of us, were close. We had a very strong bond, and we loved each other. And that's how we are till today. So so that sense of family is very strong in the Mnguni family, even after my grandmother had passed away. I think I mentioned this to Lee, that as much as my grandmother worked so hard for all of us to have what she considered the best, it was the best in education, the best in material possessions, and everything else. I think the biggest shortcoming that I then learned to realize is that there was no succession planning in this entire journey. So my dads, my uncles, heavily spoiled. When my grandmother passed away, they really couldn't sustain themselves. And this is the biggest tragedy today, that I find myself now having to support some of my uncles and aunts because it all just came crumbling down after her passing. We've got a history of cancer in the family. So my grandfather died of cancer. My grandmother died of cancer. My father died of cancer, and one of my uncles died of cancer as well. But in spite of all those tragedies that have happened, I've got incredibly fond memories of my upbringing and my family. So just to give you an idea of what my grandmother had built, so she talks about she used to talk about how they started with 5 oranges coming from the villages. They both didn't have any education with my grandfather. And by the time she passed away, my family was a distributor for South African breweries in Tembisa, a distributor for Easy Gas in Tembisa. We had bottle stores, supermarkets, fruit and veg, pharmacy, butchery, fish and chips shops. So she had really built something quite significant, which literally just came tumbling down after she passed away. So one of the big things for my grandmother was education. So she used to say, imagine if I had an education, imagine how much more I could have accomplished, even though she had accomplished so much already. So education for her was important. That was the benchmark of achievement for her children. So she invested a lot in our education, all of us in the family. So she had always dreamed of sending me to Epworth or to one of these schools in Pietermaritzburg. These very premium private schools in the Midlands, in KwaZulu-Natal, Hilton, St. Charles, St. Anne's, Wickham Collegiate, and I ended up going to Epworth, a very small private school. I think at the time when I was there must have been about 10 of us, 10 Black children that were there in the high school. It was a completely new environment. I went there when I was 9 years old. And one of the other reasons why she wanted to send me there was because of all the riots that were taking place in the township. There was political violence, and the townships were incredibly unstable. So sometimes I wouldn't be able to come home during the school holidays because you know, you couldn't travel in and out of the township. So I would spend my holidays in Balito, in Mhlanga, with my rich white and Indian friends there. And that was my first reality of the differences between Black and white lives. And to really sort of start to understand how, you know, how different our lives were, and how disconnected they were as well. And so I think I was in the SRC in high school. When I got to high school, I was incredibly vocal. I was also in the debating team at Epworth. And I think that's when I also started to experience racism in my life. And I was eventually expelled from Epworth in grade 11, purely because I just really wouldn't shut up. I challenged everything, and I think sometimes my challenges had merit. Sometimes they didn't. It was just a rebellion of somebody who was young. But when I was expelled from Epworth, I think it was called an exit letter that they wrote about me, was so terrible that no school in the country wanted to take me. So I didn't have anywhere to go. But on the day when I was expelled, I remember my headmistress was saying to me, "Your grandmother has worked so hard to put you in this school. Do you know how many children would love to have an opportunity to be in this kind of a school? And you came and you destroyed it all," and all of that. I was terrified. I was so terrified, because also my grandmother was kind of like a no-nonsense kind of chick, you know. So I wasn't really sure how she was going to react. So she had driven all the way from Johannesburg, driving to Pietermaritzburg to come and fetch me because I had been expelled. And she arrived at the office and she sat down, and she spoke to the school principal, and you know, we went to my room, we packed up all my clothes and everything. And when we got into the car, she said to me, "I'm very proud of you, you know, and not many people will understand you, and that's okay, because I do." Oh my goodness. So, you know, so you understand why this woman is such a powerful force in my life, because she was just so incredible. So that chapter ended. I ended up in the only school that would accept me was Damlin College, which wasn't really much of a school. So that's where I ended up doing my matric. But what was interesting about that year is that that's where I met Nomakwezi Hani, Chris Hani's daughter. And we became incredibly good friends. Of course, she later died of a drug overdose, but you know, that's where I started to understand politics, the ANC, and all of that. And so that was an interesting journey. And there was Mandla Mandela was there with us as well at Damlin. So, you know, all these kids that were kind of expelled from these private schools and didn't have anywhere to go kind of were dumped at Damlin. And, you know, most of them were politicians' children. And so that was a very interesting year for me that shaped my life as well. From there, I went to so after Damlin, I actually passed exceptionally well. I got a full scholarship from Eskom to go and study accounting, which was an absolute disaster because I didn't really like accounting, but I passed very well, and I got the scholarship. I got to the University of KwaZulu-Natal, and I studied accounting, and I think, managed to write one exam that entire year, and I was academically excluded after that because is Nozipho here. This is where I met Nozipho at University of Natal, but we kind of like partied up a storm, didn't make it to class very much, drank a lot, had marijuana. I mean, it was a mess. So then I had to put in a motivation to come back to university. I lost the scholarship, and then again, my grandmother had to pay for an expensive education. But nonetheless, this was done. And after I abandoned accounting, I went and then studied economics, psychology, and marketing, which was a much better route for me. After University of Natal, I then did two postgraduate diplomas at UNISA in marketing and in SME management. And then I also went to the Gordon Institute of Business Science to study business management there as well. So this is a big influence from my grandmother, that, you know, I had to stay studying, and I had to kind of continue to develop myself, and it was something important for her. But during my time at KwaZulu-Natal, something significant happened at one of the Easy Gas warehouses when my grandmother was shutting down and closing up the warehouse. It exploded while she was inside. And I mean, I don't know how she survived that, but you know, she was burnt from head to toe. And for about 3 years, she was in recovery from that. And, you know, and I couldn't pay for my school fees, and things started crumbling at home, you know, squandering all her wealth. It was an incredibly difficult and challenging time. And after she came out of that, those injuries, she tried to rebuild the business as best as she could. But the cancer as well was taking over and was creeping in, and she didn't survive the cancer journey from that. And then after my academic journey, leaving the University of Natal, I always feel like I don't know if I would call it luck or privilege or whatever. I didn't really struggle in my life, because, you know, my grandmother cushioned me and protected me so much. But literally, when I stepped out of my degree at the University of Natal, British American Tobacco offered me a job. I think I must have been at home for about a month or so, or two. And British American Tobacco offered me a job as a brand ambassador. I was a brand ambassador for Dunhill. And what really that meant was that it was 3 years of partying up a storm again. My first car from British American Tobacco was a BMW. I think I had a salary of about 10,000 Rand a month. We stayed in grand hotels, went to the best resorts around the country. I mean, it was ridiculous. But in all of that, again, lots of partying, lots of alcohol, lots of cigarettes, lots of you know, all sorts of different things. You know, in my final year of British American Tobacco, we were in a court case about sexual misconducts with executives and brand ambassadors. It was an absolute mess. But what was significant about British American Tobacco, it was where I was introduced to brands, brand influence, you know, consumer psyche, and how to manipulate it for the benefits of brand. And as twisted as that was very attractive and appealing to me. It's something that grabbed my attention, you know, because what we did is that we engaged people in a way that made smoking cool, desirable. You know, people wanted to be with us. You know, the whole strategy that British American Tobacco used, we would have accounts at the, you know, the best restaurants around the country, and you could invite your customers to come and have champagne breakfast with you, sundowners, and we attracted a lot of people into this world of smoking, and we were measured on the number of people that we would have as within our consumer database, as people, as our advocates. So we would have advocates that would also recruit other people into this world of smoking. I mean, it was incredibly brilliant. I mean, you know, as a marketing strategy, very, very powerful. And this was my journey into brand. But of course, at the same time, it was quite a destructive journey, because it was a world of excess. I had absolutely no context of money. because I would get my salary every month, but I didn't need to use it. They paid for my petrol, paid for my car. I lived in hotels, and so budgeting, all those things, I had absolutely no idea what all of that was about. And of course, reality hit when that journey ended at British American Tobacco after 3 years, because you could only be a brand ambassador for a period of 3 years. And Nozipho was there with me. She was a brand ambassador for Rothmans at the time. So after the British American Tobacco job ended 3 years later, I then defaulted into the entrepreneurial spirit that I was raised with. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And then suddenly there were no cars. I started now experiencing a life with no BMW on call. I was like, people actually live without BMW on call. That I remember actually even saying that. That's like, oh, okay, so there's life without BMW on call. There's no petrol card. There's no credit card. There's no, like I started knowing cheap wine. Like actually people drank that. And I had to actually buy my own cigarettes now. So it was like, reality. And I actually had significant savings at that time, but because I had no context and understanding of money, they were wiped out in no time, because I continued with the BAT lifestyle without the BAT support. So before I knew it, I was broke, and I think I must have been about 24 at that time, going on 25. And I started selling stuff from the boot of my car. So how I got into Millward Brown, I was coming to deliver some lingerie that I was selling from the boot of my car to a client at Millward Brown. And I bumped into Christine Malone, who was one of the MDs there. And I kind of said to her, she asked me what I was doing at reception. I said, oh, I'm waiting for somebody. And I told her that she looked like a double D. Did she want to buy a bra from me? She was in stitches. Because she couldn't believe it, like here was this kid, and and she called me up. She liked my personality. She called me up to her office and said, okay, come show me the stuff that you got. And I went and I was showing her the bras, and she offered me a job at Millward Brown. And that was my then encounter with this. So when I talk about this luck, this is what I mean, right? These were the kind of things that were happening. And this was my encounter with market research at that time. And Millward Brown tied the whole thing at BAT with brands. I started to see that one of the biggest accounts that Millward Brown had was British American Tobacco. So my biggest fascinations when I got to Millward Brown, Coca-Cola, British American Tobacco, the telecommunications company, they were spending millions. I mean, it was unbelievable. Millions and millions of rands tracking, understanding customers. That's all they were doing. From the moment people were waking up until they were going to bed, they knew everything. From all corners of this continent, whether a person was in some village somewhere, and this data was influencing product development, it was influencing distribution, it was influencing innovation, it was influencing absolutely everything. I could not believe what I was experiencing at Millward Brown. And I think I took from my grandmother. My grandmother was never discouraged by her lack of education. She was incredibly confident, very sure of herself, and it was something that I've carried with me through my life. And so when I got to Millward Brown, for me it was kind of natural to go into Christine's office and sit there and talk to her. Again, there was no context that actually this is your managing director. You don't do that. You're a junior. You need to go and sit with the juniors. And because of that, then I started developing a good relationship with the senior executive at Millward Brown, and they invested a lot in me training, especially to focus on the township market. So I owe a lot to the senior executive at Millward Brown at that time, because they identified something in me, they invested in me, and they groomed me. around it, and I'll forever be grateful. But I struggled with being in an office environment coming from British American tobacco, where everything was kind of like party. So I struggled being behind a desk and doing all those things. I remember telling my boss that I'm going to quit, but I want to come back and freelance for you. And she kind of laughed at me and she said, I don't know about that. And I went to our CEO, his name was Charles Foster at the time. And I said, Charles, thank you for the investment that you've made. But I don't really like being in a 9 to 5 and sitting behind a desk. So I'm going to resign, but can you use me as a freelancer? Because you've already invested so much in me, you don't want to lose that investment. And he agreed. So Millward Brown then became one of my biggest clients after walking out of there for quite a long time. And that's where Nestle identified me when I was a freelancer for Millward Brown. But what also happened after I left Millward Brown, I was headhunted by a magazine called Tribute at the time for a 1-year contract to help them position this particular magazine and to help them with the strategy to penetrate the Black middle class. So I was there for a year on also a subcontract, and I helped them launch this magazine and to target the Black middle class. And after my 1-year contract, I left. And that's when the conversations with Nestle started. And they said to me, listen, we would love for you. It's great that you're doing all this work with Millward Brown, but would love to work with you directly. Would like to give you some work. Would like you to be a supplier for our organization. They invited me to the office and they said, come meet the team, come meet the procurement team. Come see how we work. And I went there and I walked out there with a 300,000 Rand project. So this is the luck that I'm talking about. And please bear in mind that in all of this context of money and the value of money, zero. So even if as a freelancer, I was making significant amount of money, then now comes in Nestle giving me these projects, focusing on the township market, 300,000 Rand project, 400,000 Rand project, 100,000 Rand, and there was just all this money, absolutely no context of how to use it, how to plan for money. And then of course came SARS and everything, that comes with all of that. And I remember losing it all, moving back home, having lost everything, owing SARS a fortune. And I think it was Christine that said to me, Mpho, do you have an accountant? Like, let's start there. Do you have an accountant? No, I don't have an accountant. I think you need to get an accountant. And then he introduced me to an accountant. And that's where the journey then with money had to start for me to understand, money and how money works and how you plan, cash flow. And I remember I was like, oh, okay, so these are the classes I was supposed to be attending at the University of Natal, and I never quite made it because, I was supposed to be doing an accounting degree. And this was after a couple of years that I had gone freelance, and I was forced, well, not forced to, but I had to set up a formal business, which is Masudane, which is my current business now. So then came this long journey of me and money, and what money really is, and how money actually works, and how a business works. So I then got selected, my business got selected for the Goldman Sachs 10,000 Women program. So Goldman Sachs was looking over a 5-year period, was looking for 300 women who were in business in South Africa that they could sponsor for a scholarship to go to Gibbs. And I was one of the women that was selected, and that really changed my life, because they actually taught me how to run a business. And that was in 2013, and that really, really changed my life. And then Gibbs, again, when I was there, they then also helped me to see opportunities in market research and how I could translate that into market research education. And then that's when I then came up with this idea to go back into my community and start to educate my community about market research. Given the history of my family, watching everything that my grandmother built being destroyed almost in a blink of an eye. So really, so Masutan has been around for the longest time, but I always talk about the latter part of this business when I knew how to actually run it, because before that, I don't know if I can talk about it as really a business. So as it stands now, we are a team of 5. We work across the SADC region and East Africa. I used to previously work in Uganda, Ghana, Tanzania, where else did we work? But we now just really, we don't do Central Africa and West Africa anymore. We focus on SADC and East Africa only.
Oh,
And yes.
I'm going to just pause there for a moment, because we are enraptured by your story.
Oh,
we
sorry.
we are completely at your feet. And you're not watching the chat box, but we are absolutely.
I can't see the chat, but where's the chat?
Don't worry. Don't worry. I'm just saying that we are just loving your story, but I feel like if it carried on, we'd be rushing it now.
Okay.
So I'm wondering whether we could press the pause button now and then up again tomorrow.
Oh, is 30 minutes gone already? I talk too much.
No, you don't. And that's what I'm trying to tell you. We are absolutely loving it. And I know I'm speaking for everyone else. I'm seeing all their faces and all nodding. So thank you. We just so appreciate it. So forward to part 2. This is a series. we're binge watching a series. So if you can pick up tomorrow, we'd absolutely love that.
Okay. I'm so shocked that I've been talking for 30 minutes.
No, it's all good. All good. Okay. Thanks, everyone. And so we'll see you tomorrow. And thanks, Mpho. We just absolutely appreciate everything you're saying and doing.
All right.
Stunning session. Fantastic day further, everybody. And I'm sure we'll all have you back on tomorrow morning to catch episode 2 of this event. So well done. Great story, and look forward to hearing more and engaging with you tomorrow on it. Cheers, everyone.